Takaru is a virgin loser who joined an all-girls school to find love, but finds overpowered baddies way out of his league. However, after he unlocks an ancient power that suddenly makes him the strongest in the academy, they all start fighting for the right to get freaky with him. This story begins on Takaru's first day in the academy. While he struggles to get ready, a hottie named Haruko, who also happens to be his childhood friend, shows up to escort him. However, he accidentally pushes a pile of boxes over and uses her melons to break his fall, so she resets his face with a nasty uppercut. On the way to the academy minutes later, she tries to explain how everything works, but he ignores it to complain about still being a virgin, because there were no girls to clap in his all-boys school. Once at the academy, he gets excited to finally see baddies all day long. But Haruko tells him that there is a lot in the academy he still doesn't know about. Despite this, he continues daydreaming about milkers, so she heads inside to prepare for the entrance ceremony. After other students show up, he decides to follow them, but suddenly gets distracted by two chicks fighting with mysterious weapons. Upon seeing this, Takaru worries that he might finally be losing it before spotting another chick named Kodama hanging off a tree. The next moment, one of the girls fighting loses her sword, and after it slices off the branch, she falls on him and activates a mysterious power as they accidentally lock lips. She immediately pulls away from him, but notices that he is still lost in the sauce of her kitty, so she tries to smash his face. However, after spotting a mark on his chest, she freezes in shock, so he gets back up and heads towards the main hall while she becomes convinced that he is an enemy she has spent years searching for. Minutes later, Principal Minori welcomes them all to the academy and explains that the switch from being an all-girls to a co-ed school is not an excuse to turn the academy into a breeding ground. While Haruko immediately starts dreaming about all the freaky stuff she wants to do with Takaru. Minori further explains that they will all receive elements to help in their fight for the 8 Makin. Naturally, they all get confused by this, so she calls the two chicks from before to give everyone a demonstration. After Garrett and Izuki explain that they already had a duel outside, Kodama climbs onto the stage and challenges Takaru to a fight. Haruko immediately tells Minori that it should be against the rules since he is still a freshman, but she ends up agreeing to it. Moments later, Takaru also gets on stage for the fight, so Kodama explains that she will go easy since it's just a demonstration, but then she summons her familiars and secretly instructs them to murk him. Once the bell goes off, they both start with a beginner-friendly kung fu match, so Haruko decides to stop stressing until Kodama suddenly switches to death mode and charges towards him with a budget-friendly Rasengan. She quickly tries to intervene, but another chick jumps in and blocks the fireball with a knuckle guard that Minori immediately recognizes as one of the legendary 8 Makins. As Kodama tries to wrap her head around what just happened, Inoa introduces herself as Takaru's fiancée and gives him a kiss that shatters Haruko's heart. Hours later, she decides to go check on him in the dorm building and almost passes out from shock when she learns that Inoa already moved in. Leaked that isn't enough, Kodama also shows up and says she received approval to move in as well, using her power as dorm supervisor. Haruko quickly moves in and claims she just wants to keep him safe, so Kodama and Inoa accept her into the family. Hours later, Haruko decides to check on him, and after seeing Inaho already practicing for their freaky honeymoon night, she attacks him. The next day, Takaru wakes up and sees Haruko already making breakfast with Inoa, and after she tosses him an ice pack for the bruises he received in the night, he decides to take a shower. The next moment, he walks into the bathroom and gets an eyeful of cake as Kodama, who has just finished bathing, tries to dress up. Minutes later, she apologizes for almost sending him to the Lord, and after teasing Haruko for going through so much stress just to cook for him, she reminds them that the dorm is a little far from campus. Upon hearing this, Haruko forces them to run all the way to campus because she can't afford to be late as the vice president. After seeing that Principal Monster Milkers is already waiting for them, they manage to get in on time, but Takaru's lungs start to give out, so Kamada sends Kagezuchi to toss him over the gate. As she then walks off, Haruko explains that she can summon familiars without even using her Makin. But then Firen, the student council president, shows up and asks Haruko why she is getting friendly with a first-year nerd. After Haruko explains that they are childhood friends, Firen still tries to make it an issue until a gust of wind completely exposes her plot covers. In an effort to hide it, she ends up displaying her buns instead. So they all take turns teasing her about it before Takaru and Inaho head to class. While they both hide their seats, Miss Tamika introduces herself as the homeroom teacher before Minori rushes inside with her gravity-defying milk cannons to introduce herself as the assistant homeroom teacher. Tomika completely ignores her fatherless behavior to explain the physical assessment test they all need to do. And as soon as she tells the girls to get changed in the infirmary, Takaru and another student named Kengo asked for permission to use the restroom. The next moment, they both bolt all the way to a tree outside the infirmary and agree to enjoy the view together before watching and grading every pair of milk cannons they can see. A couple of minutes into it, Kengo spots Inaho and gets excited to grade her cakes as well, but Takeru holds his eyes shut until he gives up. After he explains that her dump truck and melons are off limits, they try to continue watching. But then Kamada asks if they want a quick or painful death. Shortly after getting their faces stomped on, they enter the infirmary for the second round of assessment. But when a nurse with milkers the size of Jupiter calls Takeru for his turn, he loses his senses to her beauty. She then guides him to place his arm inside Karanbo, an element reading bot, who then freaks out and says that Takeru's element cannot be found. Minutes later, he ends up in Minori's office with Inaho and Gen, the guy who created Karanbo. After Haruko shows up and asks if it's true that Karanbo couldn't figure out his elemental composition, Minori asks Gen if Karanbo actually works, because there have only been 2 other people in history with the same issue. As they start arguing about what his Makin might be, Takeru gets confused and asks if it's really that important. So Inori explains that the entire academy is basically one huge fight club, where the difference between life and death comes down to how skilled one is at using their Makin. After Inaho promises to protect him at all costs, Gen claims that he can figure out Takeru's Makin in a month, so they both head out to find a club for him, while Minori and Gen decide to talk about Inaho's Makin, since she is the first student they have seen, with one of the original 8 Makin. After hours of looking through every club on campus, Takeru considers giving up because they all require Makin compatibility. However, after finally discovering one for a special kind of photography, he drifts off into La La Land and imagines capturing Inaho's buns. Haruko eventually notices and snaps him out of it before saying that he has to join a club called Kenkebu. While on a run several days later, Baruko gets worried about what Takeru might be thinking, because he still hasn't said yes to joining her club. By the time she finally gets back and decides to take a shower, he wakes up and also decides to get cleaned up. The next moment, she walks out of the bath to get some shampoo and ends up displaying every inch of her plot cannons for him. Shortly after this, they start walking to school, and when Ino asks about the bruise on his face, he tells her not to worry about it before asking Haruko for more details about Kenkebu. Upon hearing this, she gets excited and proceeds to give him a full lecture, explaining how Kenkebu was created to be the school's girl power version of Justice League. With the recent transition from an all-girls school to one with boys, they already expect an increase in trouble, which is why she suggested the club to him in the first place. All of a sudden, Kengo emerges from the bushes to get acquainted with her. In an attempt to protect her from the shameless fellow peeper, Takeru grabs Haruko's milk sack and suddenly gets his jawbone shattered by a chick named Minaya. After helping him up, Inaho and Haruko explain his relationship to her again. So Minaya apologizes for trying to crack his skull and properly introduces herself. At that moment, they all hear a commotion in the main courtyard and rush over to find Izuki about to go toe-to-toe with a man-monster named Kai. After reminding her that losing the duel means she will become his lover, Kai promises to make her a loyal love slave, but she tells him not to get his hopes up. As soon as they start fighting, Takeru tries to interfere, but the girls hold him back and explain how dangerous it is to jump into a fight between two clearly powerful Makin users. Despite this, Takeru continues feeling uneasy, especially because Kai has already ripped off most of Izuki's clothes, just as he charges in for the death punch. Takeru jumps in and holds him back for a second before getting smashed into the ground. Kai immediately tries to find Izuki for a second try, but she quickly grabs his hair and delivers a brutal kick that shatters his face. Minutes later, Takeru apologizes to Izuki for interfering but says he will never sit back and watch girls get into unfair fights. Upon hearing this, Haruko tells him that the best way to do that is by joining her club, so he finally agrees to sign up. The following day, he and Kendo end up at a hot spring and wonder why it's being used as the club's first meeting spot, before the girls walk out with enough milk and cakes to solve world hunger. Upon seeing so many melons at once, both their lightsabers charge up. So Furin attacks them and asks why they allowed guys to join their pro-feminist group. Minutes later, the guys get introduced to Chachakimi and Yuka before being forced to use the other side of the hot spring, since they clearly can't control their magnums. Moments later, Inavo tries to have a conversation with Minaya about hair products, but Kamada suddenly storms over and rips out her pads before demanding to know why she is going this far to make her milkers look even better when they are already bigger than everyone else's. As she suddenly grabs both melons to punish her, Kimi asks Nurse Milkbags for permission to do the same and proceeds to manhandle both of her massive chest cannons, while Kendo and Takeru struggle to keep their demons under control. The next moment, they spot an angry bear heading in their direction and rush to inform the girls, but instead of running, they all decide to show Takaru why no one needs his protection. After grabbing a piece of the fence, Chaka makes them both serve as bait and waits until the bear gets close enough before using her Makin to transform the small slab of wood into a giant one. As she then sends the bear into the upper atmosphere, Kimmy uses her Makin to create a giant pillow for it to land on. And after explaining to the boys that they now have to help with such dangerous missions, the girls officially welcome them to the party. Days later, Azuki forces Takaru and Kengo to run laps with them around campus, and when they start begging for a break, Chaka decides to give them a little motivation with her ninja star. Soon after this, Furin summons them both for a lesson about Makin, but then falls asleep within seconds, so she uses the markers to pull them out of Snoozeville before telling them to run 50 laps around campus again. Upon hearing this, they both start begging for mercy, but she refuses to listen. So Yuka offers to fix their sleeping problem and casually lifts Furin's skirt so they can see her kitty cover. As expected, they both finally start to focus, but Furin gets too embarrassed to continue the lecture and takes them both to the dojo for special training to harden their minds. Just as they both finally enter the zone, Nurse Milkbags shows up to test their will by swinging her jugs right in front of their faces. The next moment, their enlightened minds drift to a hot beach scene with Aki running to get freaky with them. So Kodama sends her familiars to deep fry their cultured brain cells. Hours later, Takaru finally returns to the dorm and starts complaining about all the work they are forcing on him. But Haruko tells him to stop being a wuss, because they did much more back when they trained in the same dojo. After he says there was definitely less torture involved back then, Inoa offers to give him a massage and easily sends him to heaven with her touch, while Haruko slowly boils over. The next moment, she blows up and tries to torture him, but she ends up hitting all the right spots, so Inoa commends her on being such a good masseuse. Haruko then decides to finish the massage with her, but Kodama starts getting worked up because she can't detect the power he used to take Kai's punch. All of a sudden, she joins the girls to massage him and orders him to go out with her. The next morning, Takaru waits for her at a water fountain and wonders why she would suddenly want to go out with him, because she has always made her hatred for him absolutely clear. When she finally shows up dressed like the goth baddie he always dreams about, Haruko, Inaho, and Kengo find a spot in the bushes to hide and decide to stalk them to figure out what she really wants from him. Minutes later, they get to the shopping district, but Takaru gets confused by how different the malls are from the usual ones back home. So she explains how the entire region was built specifically for students of the academy. After further explaining how it all works, she spots a limited edition teddy and gives him a full view of her cakes before deciding to start a shopping spree. In a matter of minutes, Takaru's hands start to wobble as she keeps getting boxes, but she tells him to stop whining because she has one last stop for the morning. After they head out, Haruko starts to second-guess her decision to stalk them, but then she sees that Kodama just took him into a plot armor store and decides to continue the mission. Meanwhile, Takaru has just asked Kodama if it's really okay for him to be in the store with her, but she ignores him and asks for help choosing a new pair of spicy lingerie. After taking one look at them, he completely forgets the question and imagines her waiting to get his glizzy later in the night. She then tells him to wait outside so she can try them on, but a couple of minutes later, the store gets packed. So Takaru asks how much longer she is going to be. As she tries to get the lingerie off, his constant nagging gets on her nerves, so she tells him to shut up until she finishes. However, he suddenly trips and ends up seeing everything, so she blows up his head before they head out for lunch. At a cafe minutes later, they get a table and place an order for tea. But just as he finally asks why she wanted to go out with him, Izuki shows up to give them the proper maid treatment and freezes in shock the moment she locks eyes with Takaru. After Kodama places an order and reminds her to act civilized since she is still on the clock, she fights back the urge to smash Takaru's face in and quickly prepares their food. Afterward, they find a bench to sit on, so Takaru once again tries to figure out why she asked him out. Kodama also realizes that she is having a little too much fun with him, so she takes a moment to clear her head before grabbing him by the shirt to see his chest mark again. All of a sudden, three low-intelligence geeks show up and explain how they have spent the last few weeks worshipping Kodama before saying that they can't let her go out with a nerd like Takaru. After calling them stupid for thinking they can make decisions for her, she sends Ikazuchi and Kagezuchi to dispose of them. The next moment, a Makin user named Hideki shows up and challenges her to a duel without the usual ritual or announcement. Despite this, Kodama agrees to fight with him, but the moment he unleashes phantom slices against her, Takaru jumps in and takes a nasty hit. On seeing that his mark is gone, Kodama gets distracted, so Hideki charges in to finish her off, but Takaru jumps in to save her again. However, they both get blasted into the ocean and decide that it would be the perfect time to make out. All of a sudden, Takaru jumps out of the water and completely loses it as the mark reactivates on his chest. as he immediately shatters Hideki's face with a brutal back kick. Kodama realizes that he has the same power as her brother. After blasting Hideki into a tree on the other side of the river, Takeru returns to normal and completely forgets everything he just did. But Kodama decides to thank him with a kiss. Upon seeing this, her slow-brained fans lose it. And while Haruko also demands to know why she would go that far, Kengo tries to get the fragment of her lip gloss from Takeru's lips. Early the next day, Haruko wakes up and gets worried about her chances with Takeru because, while Kodama and Inaho have already kissed him, she still hasn't made her feelings for him known. After she heads out to keep herself distracted with training, Takeru comes out for a run as well and sees her, so she asks when he started taking training seriously. He then explains how the amnesia he gets whenever he uses his powers, and says he wants to become stronger to protect everyone he cares about. The next moment, she asks if he is talking about Kodama and leaves without giving him a chance to respond. At school, hours later, he gets heartbroken after seeing that she packed a whole can of green peas as his lunch and heads out to ask her about it. On seeing her, he reminds her that he has always hated them, so she tells him to start making his own lunch from now instead of complaining. As she turns to leave, he tries to grab her but slips and ends up exposing her buns right before Furin and Yuka walk in. Takeru immediately tries to explain, but Mineo resets his brain with a nasty uppercut before demanding to know why he is forcing himself on her. Takeru then tells Haruko to explain what happened to them, but she suddenly denounces their relationship and storms out to eat her lunch alone. Minutes later, she realizes that punishing him for not knowing how she feels is actually unfair. Meanwhile, Takeru finds a spot on the roof to hide from Minaya, but as he tries to figure out why Haruko has been acting strangely, he hears students clamoring and sees Chaksha about to arm wrestle with a steroid-pumping method. After she easily defeats him, Minaya finds Takeru on the roof, but instead of attacking him, she explains that everyone in the club has to go around battling with club representatives who have a problem with the new budget splits. In the club room, moments later, Furin tells them about a series of mysterious events where students got attacked and completely forgot about their assailants afterward. After agreeing to investigate the matter, Furin tells Takeru and Minaya to start by getting as much information as they can, so they head out. But Minaya stops to tell Takeru that she still hates his guts. She then decides to put their beef on hold to focus on the mission, but refuses to shake his hand. By then, Haruko and Kimi have just finished discussing the new budget with the manga club, so they head out to find the next club. But Haruto starts complaining about the stress of arguing with so many people. When Kimi suddenly says she became soft because of Takeru, she tries to deny it, but after remembering that she left him to starve out of spite, she starts feeling bad. However, the memory of Kodama's kiss reignites hatred, so she starts listing everything that makes him a horrible person, while Kimi realizes just how much she likes him. Around the same time, Minaya gets pissed at Takeru because his belly has been cranking the entire time. After he explains how helpless he is to stop it, she offers him a sandwich and thinks back to the day Haruko gave her one after seeing that she spilled her lunch. That single act of kindness sparked an unbreakable bond between them that would have led to a happy ever after if a certain four-eyed creep didn't decide to join the academy. After she takes her anger out on him, he leaves to get some water, but as soon as he decides to make himself useful to her, a baddie shows up to speak with him. As he starts to wonder why such a hottie would want to speak with him, Kumi walks up to him and offers to help with his investigation. So he introduces himself without even asking how she knows that they are looking into the recent incidents. All of a sudden, she activates her Makin and holds him in place with a web skill, but the moment she tries to attack, Minaya blocks it with her Makin and tells Kumi to surrender because her light swords never run out of juice. After admitting that her ability is actually overpowered, Kumi explains that she actually wanted to fight real warriors like their seniors, not low-level geeks who just got their first taste of power. She then uses the same skill to trap Minaya, so Takeru tries to call the others, but she tells him to stop and says they have to figure it out on their own. Upon hearing this, Kumi promises to make her regret those words and unleashes a powerful attack that rearranges her organs. However, the energy released from her attack draws Haruko's attention, so she runs out with help from Kimi and makes it to Kumi's spider web just in time to save her. The next moment, Kumi activates the final form of her webs to trap Haruko, but she still manages to move freely while Takeru gets slow-cooked by the waves of electricity. When Haruko asks Kumi why she is doing this, she suddenly remembers a painful incident and says she has been aching for a fight against the strongest Makin users in the academy. Upon hearing this, Haruko decides to honor her wish and summons a powerful sword that nearly sucks Kumi into limbo. After managing to remain in one piece, Kumi tells her to unsheathe the sword for a real fight, but Haruko explains that the sword only unlocks for powerful opponents. Feeling disrespected, Kumi charges in to prove that she is strong enough, but a single slice from the still enclosed sword knocks her out cold. Haruko then grabs Minea to make sure she is okay, and reminds her to always ask for help before Takaru apologizes for being insensitive and admits that he needs a lot more training to become as strong as them. Later on, the siblings that sent Kumi decide to create another scheme while keeping a low profile. Early the next day, Haruko completes her run and finds a drink Takaru left, so she reminisces on how he almost kissed her yesterday and decides to stop being so petty. On a rainy evening 8 years ago, Inaho was out training when Takaru saw her for the first time and told her to stop because she had already spent hours getting drenched. Despite this, she ignored him and continued training, so he ran out to keep her company in the rain. After waking up in class, she looks out the window and realizes that they just entered the rainy season, so she reminisces on that first day before Takaru suddenly calls her name. She immediately asks if something is wrong, so he explains that the boys are changing for a special training session. Once outside, she stares off into the rain again and reminds him that it was on a day like this, but he gets confused, so she leaves. Moments later, Minori makes them all grab a special orb and explains how they are to control the fog brewing inside it by channeling their willpower. Just as Takaru manages to control the fog, Inaho distracts him, but he easily accepts his weakness and says he obviously can't be as skilled as Haruko. Just then, Kengo asks about what happened with Kumi the other day, so Takaru explains how she also lost her memories and had no idea why she was even attacking them in the first place. The next moment, Mamori smacks both their heads and explains how important it is to master control of their abilities. She then decides to demonstrate how powerful their elements can be and tells Kei to take a stance, but he gets worried and asks if she can really handle his titanium muscles. After saying that she might even have to go easy on him, she channels her element to her fists and runs toward him at light speed, before landing a single hit that sends him crashing into the wall. Upon seeing this, she gets worried about him, so Inaho rushes over to ask if he is okay. After he claims it was no big deal, Inaho remembers the day Takaru experienced something similar and gave the exact same response. Later on, Buriko asks Takaru to help her get groceries because she has to stay back and sort out some council work. Around the same time, Inaho takes another trip down memory lane to the day she visited the playground with Takaru. The next moment, he walks into class to ask if she can help him with the groceries, and after she says yes, they head out. On the way there, she starts thinking about the day he introduced himself, but this time she decides to keep it to herself so they can focus on the groceries. After the shopping spree, they try to get back to the dorm as fast as possible to avoid the rain. But on the way there, Takaru suddenly asks if she is okay with him doing it in the bushes. Despite being surprised, Inaho agrees to let him hit, but then he gives her the shopping bags and says he can't hold it in before running off to take a piss. Minutes later, they end up at a bench because the rain got heavier, so Inaho takes the opportunity to tell him that it all started on a similar day. When he asks what she is talking about, she decides to give him a hint and mentions swings, but he still struggles to remember and asks if it's something that happened recently. Upon realizing that he has no recollection of what happened back then, Inaho gets heartbroken and completely stops talking, so he promises to think a little harder about it but suggests going back to the dorm first. When she tells him to go ahead, he asks if she is upset with him, so she fakes a smile and says she just wants to spend a little more time alone. After he leaves, she starts reminiscing again and gets emotional because he doesn't even remember the promise that made her fall in love with him. Minutes later, Kengo sees her walking up a mountain trail with tears running down her eyes, but instead of chasing after her, he decides to go see Takaru. Meanwhile, Inaho gets drenched in the rain and keeps walking until she hears an abandoned cat and decides to save it. Back in the dorm minutes later, Kodama changes out of her socks and tries to figure out a solution for her laundry because she now has to dry everything out inside. Right then, she overhears Takaru telling Haruko about Inaho's decision to stay back and says he definitely did something stupid to upset her, so he decides to go look for her. Just as he steps foot outside, Kengo shows up and tells him where to find her before landing a jaw-breaking punch and demanding to know why he would make such an innocent girl cry. Takaru immediately tries to defend himself, but Kengo decides to hit him again, so he blocks it and takes off running, leaving Kengo to deal with Kodama, who then helps with his file and admits to being surprised that he could be this mature. However, just as he thanks her and gets back up, the Otaka magazine he bought falls out, so Kodama reverts to her usual hateful self. Meanwhile, Takaru finally realizes his mistake, but when he finally makes it to the mountain trail, Inaho's cat runs towards him and stops right under an unstable rock formation. The moment it breaks apart, Takaru channels his element, just like Minori taught them, and manages to save it. But a second rock slide occurs right above his head. Thankfully, Inaho uses her Makin to protect him, but she suddenly passes out. After recalling how Takaru smashed his head on a tree to share her pain back then, she wakes up on his back and says he doesn't need to carry her all the way back. Takaru then insists and apologizes for not remembering their promise, but after he expresses his wish to become stronger and protect her, she realizes that he still feels the same as back then. Minutes later, Haruko helps to wash her plot cannons, and while Kodama takes the opportunity to bond with Manji, Takaru starts regretting going out without an umbrella. Several days later, a hottie named Dimitra bids a nun farewell and promises to always remember where she came from. Before the twin sisters waiting in her car get a call for work, while they immediately start heading out, an idol named Syria also gets a call while performing on stage, so she decides to end the show early. Elsewhere in the city, a chick named Yanmin gets her fall in the middle of a mission, so she asks her boss for a couple seconds and proceeds to crack the goon's skull before responding to orders. Hours later, a chopper enters the airspace above Kenbi Academy, and after the pilot asks if they want to go closer, Akaya tells them not to bother and promises to put in a good word about them before asking the twins for help getting into the academy. Around the same time, Jen starts running around campus trying to find Takaru, and after meeting up with Haruko and Kengo, he sees that they have been dragging Takaru around and asks what happened. Kengo then explains how Takaru tried to stop two chicks from fighting and accidentally grabbed their milkers in the process, causing them both to attack him until Haruko showed up to help. Just as Jen tells Takaru that he finally made his Makin, the twins create phantom stairs to help everyone get off the chopper, so Jen promises to come see Takaru later and runs off. In Minori's office moments later, Akaya shows up and tries to win her heart with the pickup lines he learned from Prawn Duke Dennis, but Minori slams the door in his face and tells him to get to the point. Shortly after this, the girls join him in the office, so he explains that they are exchange students from Kimiguri and asks if she didn't get the message about their arrival. After Minori realizes that she completely forgot about it, Akaya further explains that they were sent to investigate the possible revival of Yamato Narochi. Upon hearing this, Minori starts laughing and says there is no way something like that could be happening in the academy. But Akaya insists that it's a real possibility and explains how a secret organization has been pulling strings to make it happen. He then reminds her of the god beast rumored to have been sealed somewhere in the academy and says they can't ignore so many coincidences happening. At the same time, the next moment, Jen storms in with Aki and Tamika to ask why he showed up, but Akaya ignores him to greet the ladies. After Jen tells him to acknowledge the fact that they were first-generation Makin users, Furin shows up with Haruko and completely loses her mind to Akaya's Riz, as she immediately invites him to join the club. Sirius spots Haruko and promises to come see him later. A couple minutes after this, Yuka explains that Akaya's girls will be staying with them until summer, so they all start introducing themselves. However, when it gets to Yanmin's turn, she refuses to get close to homegrown weaklings like them and says they have no real combat experience. Syria immediately tells her to play nice, but she doubles down and says they have to prove themselves worthy of her friendship because, while she has been dealing with life-threatening missions in the real world, they have been fighting off creeps like Takaru while living comfortably on their little island. The next moment, Azuka loses it and walks up to cuss her out before challenging her to a duel to determine who is really stronger. Yanmin easily accepts the challenge, but Yuka reminds them that sanctioned fights are prohibited and suggests having a sports match instead. Minutes later, they all get changed and meet up on the volleyball court for a match, but Azuki starts complaining about only having two teammates. After Yuka reminds her that Akaya's girls don't have enough numbers, they get ready to start the match, so Inaho, Kodama, and Kimi put on cheerleader outfits to boost team spirit. The next moment, Azuki serves the ball, but instead of the usual counter, Yanmin infuses her elements into the smash and knocks Haruko down. This causes them to get pissed enough to take the match seriously, so they all spend the following minutes going all out and end up tied with 2 points left to decide who wins. Upon seeing this, Furin gets worried, but Yuka tells her not to worry since it's only a matter of who wants it more. Takaru, on the other hand, gets a lot more concerned because, just before the match, they agreed that Akaya's girls would take over the club if they won. Just then, Dimitra tells Syria to make sure they win, so she apologizes to Haruko and the others before using her element to drop the ball as far as possible. Luckily, Haruko dives in just in time to save it, so Chaka spikes it with her Makin to give Azuki an opening, which she then uses to smash the ball into Yanmin. After she gets back up, Dimitra loses it and decides to go all out, so Haruko summons her sword to fight back. However, as they both unleash their abilities, Takaru realizes that the court is about to blow up, so he jumps in to save Haruko before it explodes. Minutes later, the dust settles, but instead of Haruko, he ends up on top of Syria, who then grabs him and thanks him for being her knight in shining armor. since they never got to finish the match. They all agree to acknowledge each other's strengths and gather together for a group photo before Kengo realizes that Syria is a famous idol. In class the next day, Tamika introduces Syria to everyone, and as they all lose their minds to her beauty, Takeru asks Kengo why she is so popular. After Kengo explains what an idol is to the 21st century cavemen, Syria throws herself on him and says she has been waiting to see him again. She then leans in for a kiss, but Inaho stops her and explains that she is his fiancée. Upon hearing this, Syria asks for more details about their marriage and the life she plans to live with him. But Inaho freezes up because she never actually made plans to marry him, as Syria then continues gushing over Takeru and explains all the freaky things she wants to do to him. Kengo tells Inaho not to worry because Syria's fans would never let a nerd like Takeru get away with rizzing up their favorite idol. The next moment, all the guys in class start a mob to attack Takeru, so Syria promises to come see him later and runs off. Meanwhile, the twins also become popular in their class as all the girls huddle around to ask about the countries they have visited. As they both also become fans of the twins, Garrett and Izuki start a gymnastics contest to finally settle the scores. But Yanmin crashes their beef with Grace and wins the hearts of every girl present with her skills. Dimitra, on the other hand, decides to join Haruto in the kitchen and initially wins their hearts over with her cutting skills, before accidentally letting the food burn and explaining that she has never been good at cooking. While Akaya distracts the rest of the girls with his cooking, Dimitra gets intrigued by how free the girls are, so she tells Haruko about their mission and says they have never been to a country where Makan users were allowed to act like regular people. Haruko then explains that the whole point of the academy is to help Makan users experience a normal life while getting stronger. Around the same time, Takeru ends up in the clinic to get his injuries treated by Nurse Milk Bags, but she runs out of plaster and tries to get it from a cabinet. However, as she climbs a stool to reach it, Takeru sees more cake than his eyes can handle and asks if she needs help just to get close to it. The next moment, she slips, so he tries to save her and ends up with a face full of kitty. Shortly after this, Syria shows the girls the picture she took of Takeru and says she can't get over her feelings for him, so they all promise to help her get a first date with him so they can get closer. Minutes later, they start a secret meeting to discuss measures to deal with Inaho, Haruko, and Kodama, since they are the only baddies Syria has to worry about. Later on, Takeru finds Kengo pouting in class and asks if he has homework trouble again, but Kengo explains how uneventful his love life has been and says he expected to have already clapped half of the girls in class by now. Just as Takeru tries to relate to him, he notices a letter under his desk and forgets how to act right before Inaho walks in to check on him. All of a sudden, Kengo grabs him by the neck for always getting all the baddies and nearly chokes him out, so he escapes to the men's room to read the love letter. While he gets excited to meet his new secret admirer in the parking lot, Kengo, who had been eavesdropping this entire time, heads back to class to tell Kodama and Haruko. After listening to him, Kodama asks Haruko if she is going to do anything about it, but she acts like Takeru's love life has nothing to do with her. Just then, Furin and Yuka show up to tell them about a pile of garbage that suddenly got dumped in the backyard. Confused, they all decide to figure out who could have done it, but Furin decides to give the job to Kodama and Haruko because they have other things to do. Shortly after this, Tamika finishes with the last class of the day, so Inaho tries to leave with Takeru, but he has already dipped to meet his lover. Inaho then decides to search the entire campus for him, but after stumbling upon a bunch of snacks and seeing a Takeru doll sitting under a tree, her brain reverts to infant stage from the sugar rush, causing her to believe that it's really him. While the twins watch from a distance to make sure she remains distracted, Takeru gets to the parking lot, but after several minutes of waiting, he loses patience and starts thinking that the whole thing was just another prank from Kengo. Just then, Syria shows up and asks who he is talking to, but he tells her not to worry about it and asks why she came all the way out here on her own. After saying that she wrote the letter, she drags him along to spend the day together. After visiting a bunch of stores, she takes him to a weird-looking building and says she prepared it to spend some alone time with him. Back at the academy, Kodama and Haruko have just realized that the trash heap is actually just a bunch of piled-up tables, but Haruki still gets confused and asks why someone would go this far to make a scene. Just then, Kodama tells the person hiding to come out, so Yanmin steps out from the tree and commends her on being able to sense her energy. Kodama then demands to know why she stacked the table, but Yanmin refuses to go into details and says she just has to keep them here. By then, Takeru starts getting worried because Syria suddenly decided to lock him in a chair after he followed her into the building. While he desperately tries to get free, Inaho carries the doll to the courtyard and asks Haruko for help because she can't get Takeru to wake up. After Haruko explains that it isn't really him, Kodama swipes Suria's date plan for Myanmar, but then Haruko spots an event planned for him and fears that Surya might be using him as her love slave. She immediately takes off with Inaho and dodges Dimitra's attack before tracking down the suspicious building Surya used to capture Takaru. However, after Inaho destroys it, they realize that Surya just wanted to express her love with music. Hours later, Kodama tells them to still be careful because the girls will continue targeting Takaru. Meanwhile, Takaru gets confused in bed because he never expected to feel nothing for a baddie like Surya. Several days later, Takaru and Kengo set up a ladder right under the girls' changing room window and remind themselves that they only chose to enroll into 10B2, enjoy seeing cakes and melons whenever they want. 3 days before this, Kengo summoned every guy in the academy to a top-secret meeting, where they all agreed that something had to be done about their boring, plotless lives. Soon after this, he presented Furin with a petition filled with signatures of every boy on campus, demanding that they reschedule the annual swimming lessons so boys and girls could train at the same time. Upon hearing this, Azuki told them to just admit that they wanted to turn the academy into a breeding site, but they both insisted that it was the only way to promote equality and mutual respect among students. Despite this, Furin explained that they also needed to convince every girl on campus, which was definitely not possible. But Kengo already had another plan to fix that and suggested a water riding contest between guys and girls to decide. After giving it some thought, Furin agreed to it, but Haruko rushed in at the last moment to stop her from falling into Kengo's obvious trap. However, Furin insisted that it made no difference because there was no way the guys could defeat them. Back in the real time, the girls continued changing for the contest, so Kengo tries to reach the window, but they end up being inches away from it and desperately try to get close enough. All of a sudden, Kai shows up and shakes the ladder until they both crash, before demanding to know why they are violating the ladies. Kengo then tries to explain the importance of their mission, but Kai refuses to listen to a single word until they ask if he doesn't want to see Azuki's melons. The next moment, he asks for the plan to avoid getting caught, so they introduce Kagashiro, a Maken user who should be able to keep them hidden with his camouflage skill. Unfortunately, Kagashiro explains that he can only make them invisible, which is actually useless against girls like Haruko, since she can easily detect their energy. Shortly after this, Furin, Yuka, and Kimi take to the stage and welcome them all to the riding contest, before splitting everyone up into groups and explaining that the team with their headband intact at the end wins. Once they all get inside the water, Kengo reminds the boys of the strategy meeting they cooked up to get the upper hand by using Inaho's love for Takaru against her. The next moment, Takaru charges in, thinking she cares too much to counter, but she easily blocks his attempt and tells him it won't be that easy. Upon hearing this, he recalls another tip Kengo shared before pulling her in close and distracting her with the magic words. After he eliminates her team, Kodama's fan club decides to take her on by themselves, but she immediately sends her familiars to keep them busy. However, they manage to stay up and tell her not to feel insecure about having the smallest melons on campus. This causes her to finally lose it, so she blows them all up, but Kengo uses that opportunity to snatch her headband, putting the boys back in the lead. Haruko then decides to get the girls their first win by taking on Takaru, but after she counters all his attacks, he suddenly grabs her melons, so she literally sends him up to the Lord with a deadly uppercut. However, his teammates manage to catch him and realize that he snatched her headband right as she delivered the punch. With Haruko eliminated, Azuki decides to redeem the ladies by taking Kai down, but he easily blocks her first attack. She decides to get serious and shatters his spine with a painful kick to the stomach. The next moment, he tries to drown her entire team as a last-ditch effort, but Suria's speeds pass with hers and grabs his headband, just as Azuki tries to celebrate. Akita grabs her headband and places the boys back on top. The next moment, Takaru and Kengo decide to take Surya down together, but she casually tosses them both around like ragdolls, so they retreat to cook up a new strategy. On the other hand, Akaya and Nurse Milkbags unleash their powers with the hopes of overpowering each other, but then Aki suddenly takes a break to recharge, so Akaya seizes the opportunity to grab her headband. He then tries to rub it in her face, but Minori yanks him off their heads and slams him into the water, leaving only Surya to deal with Takaru and Kengo. Leap before, they both charge toward her, but Kengo picks up speed to land the first hit and gets thrown away again. This time, he manages to unlock her swimsuit, but she came prepared with a special melon wrap that somehow manages to keep her jugs intact, with only Takaru left. Surya asks Dimitra to use her water skill, so she creates a mini tsunami to drown his team, but at the last moment, she sees a chick named Minerva and gets distracted, so Surya falls into Takaru's arms. After he grabs her headband, the boys seal their victory, but Surya completely forgets about the contest and tells the others that it's time to complete their mission. At the start of the swimming lessons days later, Takeru and Kengo get excited to see that their hard work paid off, but then they get to the pool and notice that the girls are invisible. Kageshiro then explains that they made him use his powers, so none of them, or you creeps watching this, can see their cakes. The next day, Takeru and Kengo find a spot under the tree to escape from the insane heat. But then Takeru catches a glimpse of Minerva's beauty radiating in the sun, so he calls Kengo to take a look. Meanwhile, Haruko, Inaho, and Kimi head to the roof to enjoy popsicles since they rarely get to take a break. After thanking Haruko for paying, they ask if it's really okay for them to be having fun during school hours, but Haruko tells them not to worry about it. Just as Kimi notes that Furin also started taking unusually long breaks since Akaya showed up. Furin tells them to stop gossiping because she has an important job for Haruko to handle. She then tells them about Minerva and says Haruko has to keep an eye on her, since she didn't get the usual orientation like Dimitra and the others. The next moment, Minerva jumps off a roof and introduces herself, but the girls get curious about her walking cane, so she explains that her eyes have a special power that might make them uncomfortable. As she slowly opens them up, a powerful gust of wind flips their skirts open, so she immediately tries to cover up. But Minerva tells them not to bother, because it won't stop until she gets every detail about their cakes. While they continue talking, Takeru and Kengo get tired of searching every spot on campus for Minerva, but just as they consider heading back inside, a guy named Masaru and a chick named Oto may start roasting each other in the main courtyard. After Masaru promises to spare her worthless life if she cleans his shoes with her tongue, she secretly activates her Makin before they both tell Takeru to sanction their duel. Left with no other option, he asks Kengo to go inform the others and performs the duel ritual before giving them permission to start the fight. Masaru then uses his Makin to pull Oto Hime close so he can unleash his martial arts, but she suddenly starts smiling and calls him stupid before using her Makin to turn him into a puppet. While Masaru finds himself in a pocket dimension, Takeru wonders why he suddenly stopped moving. So Oto Hime's brother explains her powers to him before she starts snapping Masaru's bones. Upon seeing this, Takeru runs in to stop her, but she immediately uses the same skill to capture him as well. However, the thought of getting defeated by another chick causes Takeru to get pissed, so he fights back and manages to resist her control. Just as he gets close enough, Oto Hime crushes his puppet, but after he loses consciousness, Minerva shows up and deactivates Oto Hime's Makin before telling her to never go that far during a duel. After Ayaka also shows up, she tells them to focus on their mission and threatens to report them to her grandfather, who happens to be the chief of Kemigiri. The next day, Furin and Yuka call Takeru to the council office and explain that his interruption during Oto Hime's duel has caused a lot of backlash against them, especially because he is the only enforcement club member yet to pass the Makin element test. After Furin puts him on probation and promises to fire him if he fails the makeup test scheduled for the next day, he calls Kengo and the girls to talk about it. Just as Kengo attacks him for having so many chicks to talk to in the first place, Minerva shows up and suggests holding a training camp just for him since he only has a day to master everything. Minutes later, they return to the dorm, and Kengo immediately attacks him again because he never knew his buddy had started a harem while still acting like an innocent nerd. After Minerva talks him out of committing murder, they'd all agreed that it would be a great idea to have Kengo start the first part of his training outside while they stay home and discuss the best way to help him out. As soon as they both leave, Minerva starts asking about their love lives and says it's an important first step to helping Takeru. So Kodama decides to go first and claims it has been ages since she experienced true love with a certain man. When she teases Haruko and Inaho for falling for the same guy, Haruko gets embarrassed and acts like she has never had feelings for Takeru, while Inaho proudly confesses her love and describes the kind of family she wants to start with him. Just then, Kodama decides to go check on Takeru, and when Haruko tries to tag along, she tells her to stay back and focus on making him a meal instead of always acting out of character just to get his attention. Minutes later, Takeru finally learns to channel his element, but instead of just blowing up the target vase Kengo set up, he ends up imprinting a mark on the tree. While they try to understand how, Kodama realizes that Takeru might be the key to unlocking the Great Seal, but then she senses Minerva close by and demands to know what she really wants. Around the same time, Dimitra and the other girls meet up with Ayaka on the roof to ask why he wanted them to start living as regular students. He then asks how life has been since they first showed up, and after they admit that it feels a lot better than being treated like weapons in other countries, he decides to come clean. Meanwhile, Kodama has just shown Minerva her true form, but instead of losing bladder control and begging to be spared, Minerva explains that they have to take her back to Kamigari to make sure the seal never gets broken. Upon hearing this, her familiars charge in to defend her, but Minerva easily defeats them both, so Kodama decides to have a duel to the death. The next moment, Minerva claims she doesn't actually want to fight and explains that she just wants to understand her powers, as well as the truth behind Takeru's abilities. She further admits that the academy is the best place to live as a Makan user, so Kodama realizes that she is actually just curious and asks if she bothered to help Haruko and Inaho with dinner. The next day, Takeru manages to pass the makeup test, so Furin reinstates him as a member of the club right before Syria shows up and demands to know why he didn't ask for her help for his training. After Minerva claims it was just his way of displaying affection, she forgives him and offers to give him a private lesson in her bed later on. Days later, Gen finally installs Takeru's Makan into his arm, but he gets confused and asks why it isn't a physical one like most of the other students. Minori then explains that while most Makan can be carried around or attached like actual weapons, the really powerful ones are embedded into the user's body for easy deployment during battle. However, she warns him to always deploy it before his opponent, as most Makan users have the ability to mess with their opponent's devices if they activate theirs first. After she stops Gen from giving it a stupid name, Takeru heads out and decides to take his training more seriously, since he no longer has an excuse to be weak. Shortly after this, he tells Kengo about a summer camp Haruko mentioned, but as he explains all the beautiful beaches they will get to experience, Kengo starts fantasizing about plot-heavy baddies littered across the summer camp and tweaks out until Furin calls the meeting to attention. After saying that they will be holding the summer camp soon, she asks for their help with the events because they already burned through most of the budget. When they all start complaining, she loses it and tells Yuka to explain why there is no money left in the first place. So Yuka carefully lists out all the worthless expenses they all made that burned through what should have been used for the summer camp. On the way out moments later, they all try to figure out a solution to still have the perfect summer camp. And after seeing Minori putting up flyers for a special offer day in Azuki's cafe, they all decide to take up jobs and make as much money as they can. The next day, Azuki notices the huge line outside the cafe and wonders if everyone finally realized that they make great food. Before taking a look at the flyer for the day and seeing that they only came to see Haruko's melons in a maid outfit. Once inside, she rushes to ask Catherine how they all got jobs in the cafe, so he reminds her that they had a special offer planned for the day. In the dressing room moments later, Azuki gets pissed because all their usual customers will obviously become obsessed with all the new baddies serving them. So she grabs Takeru and threatens to smash his skull because he obviously convinced them to do it. As she starts complaining about losing all her adoring fans, Kengo tells her not to worry because someone came specifically to see her. Seconds later, she realizes that it's just Kai, but the fact that he came all this way to see her causes her to feel a little better. Just then, they see Kodama turning her fanboys into loyal slaves instead of serving, so Azuki considers stepping in, but after taking a look around, she notices that they are all serving in their own way and decides to let it go. However, Haruko ends up being the center of attention because, despite looking like the baddie creeps like you will never get to smash, she struggles to keep a single cup of tea from spilling. After getting soaked in the special milk, she apologizes for being clumsy, but everyone tells her not to worry because seeing her in such a freaky state is enough to satisfy their inner demons. While Azuki runs off to the kitchen to stop Chacha and Kimi from wasting all the ice cream, Takeru finds Minori, Fuka, and Gen at a table, so he asks why they showed up. Minori then reminds him of the friend she mentioned, but instead of Azuki, it ends up being Catherine, who then explains that he used to be a delinquent back when his nuts were still intact. Takeru gets surprised by the fact that an ex-student could continue living around Kenbi after graduation, so Catherine explains that it's all thanks to the three of them, before heading out to attend to more customers. Upon seeing that Takeru is still fixated on their friendship, Minori tells him to focus on his job for the day, but after he leaves, Gen reminds them of a betrayal that almost ruined their relationship. Around the same time, Otobi and her brother release a spy bird into the academy and start cooking up a scheme to finish what they started. By then, Takeru has just noticed that Catherine can't handle any more orders, so he offers to take over and immediately starts handing out orders to make sure all the customers are satisfied. Several minutes into it, Inaho tries to serve an order, but then she accidentally bumps into a customer and starts crying. So Takeru swoops in to save the day and checks on the customer before helping her. Upon seeing this, Haruko's love for him reaches new heights. But when he tells Kimi to get more milk from the storage unit, Chaka exposes Haruko's milkers for the world to see and tells him to take from her instead. In a matter of seconds, Takeru's brain implodes, and after he passes out, Haruko storms out, so Azuki tells Chacha to stop messing with her milkers. When she suddenly says they got bigger because of her feelings for a certain someone, Takeru wakes up and fears that he might lose her forever. Minutes later, Kodama serves an omelette rice dish for her fanboys, but they misspell her love message as acceptance for her small melons. While she immediately starts punishing them, Takeru and Kengo try to enjoy the show, but then Azuki tells him that Haruko still hasn't returned. So Takeru runs off to find her. On a small bridge moments later, Haruko reminisces on how embarrassing Chacha's prank was, without realizing that Otohime just selected her as the new test subject for her plan. As she continues thinking about how Takeru feels about her, a suspicious Makin user suddenly shows up and blasts her off the bridge. While falling, she tries to activate her Makin, but he neutralizes her element and continues attacking, so she jumps onto a car to get some distance. After blowing the car up, he charges in to finish her off, but Takeru jumps in to block the attack and manages to pin him down. However, when he also tries to activate his Makin, it fails, so he remembers what Minori said about deploying it on time and decides to focus on keeping the Makin user in place. The next moment, he gets tossed away, so Haruko steps in to protect him. Just as she tries to attack, Azuki lands a dropkick that knocks the user out cold, but when she tries to take the mask off, Minori shows up to stop them. Moments later, Catherine unlocks it himself and tells Minori that he got controlled again, but this confuses Takeru. So Jen explains how Kemigari tried to take over the academy years ago and controlled many students, including Catherine, to accomplish their goal. While they continue talking about it, Otohime starts cooking up another plan to make Takeru reveal his true powers. But then her smoking hot sister, Kinkyu, walks in and offers to help make sure they succeed this time. Several years ago, a friend of Haruko's got stranded in a river and was about to drown when Takeru jumped in, despite not being able to swim, and managed to save him with a branch. This causes Haruko to become obsessed with getting stronger, because she had never felt more useless in her entire life. On her way to school a couple of days after the incident with Catherine, she reminisces on that day and wonders if she is now strong enough to match Takeru's bravery. The next moment, she gets kidnapped and wakes up paralyzed by Otohime's Makin. Shortly after this, Takeru meets up with Kodama, who then tells him that Haruko still hasn't shown up despite the fact that she left for school before the rest of them. After they both decide to start searching for her, Kodama tells him to keep it secret from the others just so they don't worry over nothing. Minutes later, he runs into Inaho, who then places a protective charm on his tie and apologizes for not being able to protect him when Catherine got possessed. After also telling him to respect Haruko's feelings like he does with hers, she runs off, so he continues the search. On his way up a flight of stairs minutes later, a random girl suddenly claims to know where Haruko is, so he tells her to spill it. But then Kinkyu explains that she is the one in control and instructs him to come to the top of Mount Amanohara if he ever wants to see her again. As soon as the girl passes out, Takeru runs all the way to the top of the mountain and meets Kinkyu, who then promises to spare Haruko if he fights long enough to make her go all out. When Takeru asks why she is going this far just to get to him, Otohime uses the android bird to join the conversation and explains that it's also payback for the way he humiliated her the other day. After reminding him of her puppet skill and threatening to crack every bone in Haruko's body, she warns him to do exactly as Kinkyu said. He then asks Kinkyu for the reason behind her obsession with strength, so she gives him the cliché speech about escaping natural selection by climbing to the top of the food chain. Just as he tries to yap about his commitment to protecting the people he loves, she tells him to save it and prove his commitment by taking her down. For some reason, he refuses and says he still doesn't like hitting chicks, so she releases an elemental blast into his chest and almost opens a hole right through his spine. Despite almost meeting his maker, Takeru still insists on being a pacifist and promises to serve as her sandbag if she leaves Haruko out of it. So Kinkyu takes him up on the offer and dislocates his face with a dropkick. She then tells him that he has to fight if he actually wants to protect the people he loves. But this triggers a dark memory he forces himself to forget. At that moment, Haruko also remembers the day he tried to save his mum from a fight and was forced to watch her bleed out due to how powerless he was. As she tries to figure out an escape plan, Kinkyu turns Takeru into a human soccer ball and slams him into a wall while asking if he is just too weak to fulfill his own promise. While desperately fighting to remain conscious, Takeru thinks back to the day his mum pulled him aside to explain the importance of becoming a strong man. She told him to never use his strength for personal desires and only use it to help the people he loves, but he always struggled to understand it. Now, with Haruko's life hanging by a thread, he decides to finally let loose and activates the ancient power trapped deep inside his body. Just then, the entire mountain lights up, and the sudden surge of magical energy causes Kodama to get worried, so she sends another familiar named Kazuchi to check it out. As Takeru's power continues building up, Kinkyu gets excited to see how far he can take it until he finally releases the final form of Yamato Orochi, the ancient beast sealed in the mountain. Upon seeing this, Otohime tells Haruko to say her goodbyes to the academy, because he is likely going to destroy everything in a fit of rage. Moments later, Katsuchi starts heading up the mountain and prays for Kagezuchi and Ikazuchi's recovery so she can go back to being the backup. Just then, she notices a powerful force heading in her direction and jumps out of the way before Takeru explodes out of the mountainside and continues heading toward the academy. At that moment, Chacha and Kimi notice him, but before they can react, he shows up and destroys almost every classroom in sight. Luckily, Kodama and Izuki save the girls from the explosion, but after safely getting to the ground, they see Takeru hovering above the academy. So Chacha starts trying to perform an exorcism on his soul, while Izuki powers up to attack him and says they have to stop him by force. The next moment, he unleashes a flurry of fireballs and joins him on the ground for a proper fight. Seeing this, Otohime and her brother start to consider the fact that Takeru might be like them, but Haruko immediately tells them to think again, because he has always been the type to sacrifice himself to save others. As she continues yapping about how kind he is, Otohime uses her abilities to get some peace and quiet. But then Haruko breaks free thanks to Dimitra and the others, after they all explain how much they have grown to love the academy. The twins create a portal to get her back to Takeru. Naturally, Otohime tries to stop them, but Ayaka shows up and tells her to give up and avoid another humiliating beatdown. By then, Takeru has just started absorbing every element in sight, so Kengo and the girls stay out of sight and brainstorm for a solution, because his body can't handle so much power at once. Just then, Haruko makes it back and pulls out her sword with the hopes that it can disperse Takeru's powers. As soon as he starts attacking, she releases a fraction of her sword's magic to force him back, but he easily absorbs it as well, so she charges in and places the sword right above the protective charm Inaho got him. This triggers a chain reaction that forces his cells to revert to their usual state, but after the dust settles from the explosion, he wakes up to a face full of milk and starts calling out to her until she wakes up. She immediately tries to smack him as always, but the thought of almost losing him causes her to get emotional. After Kengo and the girls commend her on saving the day, Kinkyu pulls out with a small unit and offers Takeru a spot in Kamiguri. She further reminds him that they still plan on taking over the academy and says there is no point in resisting. But he refuses and says he would rather stay and fight with the girls. Just then, Furin and Yuka show up as well, so they all get into position for a final battle. But Kinkyu decides to retreat and promises to be back for him. Several days later, life returns to normal in the academy, but Takeru finally keeps to his word and starts training with boulders until his frail arms call it quits for the day. Comment who deserves to be Takeru's lover between Haruko and Inaho if you made it this far, and don't forget to leave a like and turn on post notifications to make sure you don't miss the next video.